Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Gallant Bodybuilding, Mountain. And today I'm going to talk to you about numerous subjects. What a surprise, because that's what I do on these workout vlogs. So I'm going to do a bit of a workout today. I'm just planning on going light, just doing mostly light pumping type movements, because I've talked about this with you guys. I believe in going heavy, and then there's times where going light has tremendous benefit. I can access different muscles, different ranges of motion, different things. I can get more creative for periods of time. And then I go back into the extreme efficient range of motion, heavyweight type stuff, because that's where I create that anabolic mechanism in the body. And then from there, I take advantage of that with the light weights as well. So it's a combination of both. It's not always about one size fits all. And again, you guys who are veterans here know exactly what I'm saying. But if a couple of you guys are new, because a friend sent a link to this video because they want you to see the light of what is Natural Gallant Bodybuilding, well then, here you go. Here's your first entry teaching, okay? So anyway, what I'm gonna do today is a little bit of upper chest again, and I'm going to do some triceps, do a little bit of bicep curls, and some back. And I may do the other half of my body later. I may do some legs and calves and so forth later. So I'm going to include just a few smaller body parts in this workout while I'm talking to you about a few different concepts. And one of those concepts is this. I just had somebody ask me about more... I just had somebody ask me about when I started training and when I started competing, why did I go the natural bodybuilding route? And was there temptation to go in the other direction, to go in the performance enhancing drug route, right? Like, was I tempted? And I made a video on this called Why I Decided to Be a Natural Bodybuilder. But I'll refresh you on this in case you're new here and you haven't seen that video. So a lot of you guys might not know, but my father was a competitive powerlifter, and he was also a drug-free athlete. But as he was competing at a very high level, he encountered a lot of people who were using performance-enhancing drugs and steroids and so forth. And he would see a lot of the things that would happen to these people, such as frequent nosebleeds or bone breaks during certain lifts, and a lot of muscle tears and issues and things that would pop up. And based on those horror stories that he told me, and along with some of the things I was seeing about some of the stories that were talked about with certain competitive high-level bodybuilders, like certain health problems they were having, I realized pretty quickly that although these people looked great and very impressive in their muscularity, there was a price that they were paying for it. And because I love training so much, and I had, especially when I was a young man, I identified so much with my ability to lift and my muscularity. It was really one of the only things I was good at, right? And because I wanted to be able to train right up until the time I'm 70 or 80 years old, or right into old age, I knew that if I made a decision such as getting into performance-enhancing drugs, that there would be a repercussion that would probably prevent me from being able to train later on in life. And I also didn't like the fact that these guys that were using these performance-enhancing drugs were dependent on constant use in order to maintain the majority of their results. And I wanted everything that I gained to be mine, right? So I saw no logic to, say, winning the lottery, right? And then the next day somebody comes and just takes all the money away from you. Like, if I'm rich for a day, who cares? I knew that being rich for a day had no value. Right? Or being super strong or having lots of muscle for a day has no value. It's about what can you maintain for the longest period of time. That's really the average amount of muscle mass that you can have and the average amount of health, right? So the thing that really clinched it for me, though, was that certain bodybuilders were having massive organ problems, not just the heart stuff, but sometimes they'd have to shit in a bag or sometimes they'd have some sort of colon issues or these different types of things where they'd actually have to have their colon taken out and stuff. And I was like, that's not for me. Like, there's no way in the world I'm going to start playing around with my hormones and possibly have some disaster happen. And based on my luck, in my life, I know that I probably would have been one of those guys that the minute I experimented with anything, it probably would have went horribly sideways. So I didn't want to take that risk. And at the same time, again, I wanted to gain what I could and maintain it. But the temptation as a young man was there. I mean, when I was 20 years old and I was working security in a bar, I'd see lots of guys that had massive amounts of muscularity that were in that industry, right? And I'd ask them, I'd say, oh, how'd you get so big, so fast? I knew you a couple of years ago, you weren't so big. And of course, they'd tell me that they were using performance-enhancing drugs, right? They have the big moon face, they look like an orangutan, right? And they're all bloated up and huge traps and shoulders and asses and all this. And I was like, man, how'd you guys get so big so fast? And of course, these guys, they'd use drugs for 6 months to a year, and they would blow past my 7 or 8 years of training results, right? Because when I was 20 years old, I was training 6 years at that time. And yeah, these guys would look much better than I did within months, I knew some guys that they barely ever trained, and they'd start using something and they'd look better than me within 2 or 3 months of their training. But then I'd also see the crash that these guys would hit as soon as they stopped doing what they were doing, the depression that would hit, and the downward spiral of their training, and the fact that they couldn't maintain their gains, right? A lot of them had a lot of trouble with that. And it caused lots of problems. I mean, they'd have different types of side effects they'd have to deal with, such as, gynecomastia, right? The slang word is bitch tits, right? But they'd have all sorts of other issues, right? Such as hair loss and heart problems, blood pressure problems, and all these things that they didn't really talk about. And that just made it an easy choice for me because my health was my most important thing. And I figured if you don't have your health, then what's the point of having a bunch of muscle and then dying? Like, there's just no point to it, right? So that's why I decided to do what was beneficial long-term. And this takes me to my last point, that there is temptation in all sorts of things in life, but you have to temper that temptation with what is best for you long-term, not just what is best for you short-term, right? You could start, I don't know, doing something horrible to make money. Tomorrow you could do something that's horrible, but you make a lot of money, right? Such as you could lie to everybody or, do all sorts of detrimental things, become a gangster, whatever it is, right? But if you do that, one could argue that over the long run, there's a good chance you're going to have a horrible life, right? And I think a lot of people who get too short-sighted, they just look at what's in front of their face. They look, okay, how can I get something right now? Who cares about the long term? They start making these really dumb decisions, and yeah, that's basically it. So natural bodybuilding teaches you wisdom in this way, where you understand that there is a trade for everything, that everything is a trade-off, everything is an exchange. And if you take a short path to get a lot of results, there's going to be some price you pay for that easy short-term path, So really what I'm saying is the easy short-term path is usually the harder long-term path. I mean, I think you can all agree with that, right? So that's why I chose the natural bodybuilding approach. That's why I chose to stay with it, because I also had, one could say, an ego where I wanted to own my own gains myself. I wanted to be responsible for everything I did. I didn't want somebody to come and say, oh, you just took this and that's where your muscle came from. I didn't want that. I wanted to be the owner and orchestrator and architect of my own results. And therefore, if I ever lost my results, I could gain them back again because I knew how to do it without dependency on anything, right? Except for eating and training, So yeah, that's really the guy you're talking to right now. That's why I decided to be a natural bodybuilder. And thank God for my father having a good influence on me in my life. A lot of people don't have that. I had that. And I had a twin brother as well, so we talked sense into each other whenever temptation came along, right? But in the end, that's what I decided and why I decided to be a natural bodybuilder. Mountain. So yeah, let's do some upper chest now. I'm just going to do some really light today. It's the 3rd day in a row I'm doing chest. And this is another technique that I do from time to time. Sometimes I'll train super light, but I'll do multiple days in a row just to kind of pump an area. And it feels really sore right now. I know it sounds counterintuitive to train when you're sore, but sometimes I'll do that with lightweight. I'm only going to do maybe some light flies with 30 pounders and then some upper chest with 70 pounders, which is basically only 2/3 of the weight I usually use. So basically what I'm going to do is that. But the thing is, I get wicked pumps from it and it feels really good. So that's what it's about sometimes. I just like to feel good, you know? So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about possibly some bicep training and then maybe some other subject that might come up. What do you think?
So as you can see, once you start playing around with extremely lightweight, you can start changing things around as far as doing pauses at the bottom and you know, basically organizing your movements in whatever way you believe, or at least you experience more muscle activation. So this is a time that you can play around with sticking the chest out more, or not sticking the chest out, or you know, maybe straightening the arms a little bit more, or bending them. You know, this is what technique comes out of it for me. And this is where I feel the chest get a nice good stretch, but I don't have to worry about any sort of risk based on overstretching with heavy weight. So using lighter weight gives you that opportunity to really find out where those stretch thresholds are, as well as start to get some extra activation that would be, let's just say, a little bit too risky with heavier weights. So this is why I always say that when you lift heavier weight, the form has to change a little bit, because different weak links come up depending on the type of tensions that you're dealing with. And when you're dealing with extremely high amount of tension, or you know, low rep ranges, or high intensity low rep ranges, you have to be conscious of the way the forces, let's just say, exponentially exert themselves on certain areas, right? So say I'm doing 5 rep sets with flies, that would be a huge muscle tear risk. And at the same time, you know, you would have to adjust the technique if you're going to avoid that risk to compensate for that. Although I think this is a bad example. I would never recommend doing 5 rep sets for flies. But this is really why using light sets from time to time is a really useful technique, because you can do things differently to get muscle activation. And this is where a lot of the old school bodybuilders were really acute with this. I mean, they were really, I don't know, acute, is that the right word? I mean, they were focused on this principle, and sometimes I think they went a little bit too far into one direction, getting so hyper-focused on using light weights all the time that sometimes they threw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. So I do believe there's a place for heavy and a place for light, and both have extremely great benefits. And that's why I play around with my exercises like this.
So as you can see, that's pretty lightweight for me, just doing 30 pounders or 50 pounders for incline flies. And of course I do a bit of a hybrid fly, that has to do with my own sort of individual situation. But I always found that keeping the elbows bent during flies was the best policy, because it helps protect the shoulder joint and so forth by bringing in the bicep to keep that shoulder contracted and together. I always found when I hyperextended or extended the elbows too much, I got just weird experiences through the joints and stuff. It wasn't necessarily positive. So that's why you see me do that. But you'll also see me press in a second. If you haven't seen it before, you'll see me press, and I'll just do lightweight, 70 pounders. And yeah, I get great muscle activation from that. So the truth is that using lightweight is great for periods of time, and then using heavyweight is great. But if you're doing super high frequency training, you will definitely have to do lighter more often than if you're just training that body part once a week or once every 4 or 5 days, right? So this is the great thing about high frequency training, is that you can get a great pump and a great benefit, but you don't always have to annihilate the entire system and the joints by handling heavy weights all the time. Sometimes by doing cumulative stimulation, by immersing the body into multiple forms of tension throughout the week, you can get a really neat result. And that was really surprising to me back in the day when I started experimenting with higher frequency training, because I was indoctrinated into the approach that heavy weight is the only thing that matters, and whatever helps you achieve more or heavier weight the next workout, that's going to give you the best result. But there's also a downside to that type of training, where there's injuries and higher risk when you start using heavier weight and so forth. And so I found that if I can use heavy weight, but also train the muscles more often, there is something that happens when I start combining those higher rep ranges and those lower rep ranges, and I get the best of both worlds from doing that. So when you're using a lighter weight, you're also able to stimulate the muscle, remind it that it has to learn how to deal with tension. And at the same time, you can also play around with certain ranges of motion that might not feel right once you're using heavier weight. And you can basically rehabilitate these different areas and make sure that they're bulletproof and strong for that when you do use the heavier weight, regardless of what range of motion you decide, you're going to be more stable and you're going to have a better mind-muscle connection and a better groove. And a better groove always means more strength and less injury risk. And that's the great part about that. So that's really where I stand with the training. It's like I don't believe in light or heavy. I believe in both. It's a combination of the both and the perfect synergy between the two that makes the magic happen in natural bodybuilding. Let's do one more set of incline flies, then I'm going to go into some presses. So that feels pretty good. I mean, I did lightweight. As you can see, I'm slightly pausing at the bottom. I'm making the movement harder for myself on purpose because I'm just trying to play around with the stability and the range of motion in different parts of the lift. And of course, whenever I'm doing this, I'm always paying attention to where I'm feeling these forces and whether the joints feel good or not, right? So when I'm using heavier weight, I'm a bit more conservative on how far down I come and stuff because there's more danger on the tendons and tissues, and I can feel it. I can actually feel it. It's not just a concept. I'm actually feeling how these things are happening. So the truth is that you're an artist. As a natural bodybuilder, you're a bit of an artist. And sometimes, like artists do, they work with different paint brushes, different paints, right? Different canvases. So just because you're using a thin paintbrush rather than a thick one at times, doesn't mean you're less of an artist. It just means you're working on some fine detail stuff. So when you're working on some fine detail stuff, such as small little, let's just say, micro pockets of adjustments in different parts of the range of motion, you want to be using a bit of lighter weight, but it's still tremendously enjoyable. I did the pre-exhaustion with the flies for a few sets, and then once I start going into the inclines here, it just feels like my chest has got so much tension and exhaustion going through there in a positive way. So this is why I always say don't get stuck into one way or the other. Like, try to play around with it, understand that you're a great artist and you're playing with these different tools, such as range of motion and tensions. And the first priority always is to avoid injury. And second priority is to build muscle, right? I mean, if you get injured and you build muscle, what's the point? You want to make sure that you're doing things safely. And by doing the lighter weight workouts from time to time, you'll notice that you'll be able to access different muscle fibers and refine your groove and possibly rehabilitate your joints around certain ranges of motion that are too dangerous to play around with heavy weight, right? You want to be doing the lighter stuff. It's really enjoyable to do that. And that's another reason why I do like sometimes doing multiple days in a row of training a certain body part, because I can just play around. It's just playing in the gym constantly. And from playing, I start to access the muscle fibers in new and creative ways. And sometimes you'll find out that lightweight is better to access certain muscle groups than heavy, because when you're using heavy, other muscle groups start to take over. But when you use light, then it's almost like that isolation becomes possible of a certain area. So yeah, don't get too trapped into heavyweight at all costs, because sometimes that can work against you in refining your physique and working some of those hard to get areas, right? So I found that with a number of different movements. Flies is definitely a movement I found that with. Triceps as well. Like if you use too heavy weight on the triceps, sometimes you'll end up bringing in the shoulders and the internal rotator cuff to try to get that weight up, right? I've also noticed it with biceps. If I do too heavy, then I start to bring in more momentum and more of the front delts. And even front raises. If I use a weight that's too heavy for front raises, what'll happen is I start to exploit the joints, and the joints start to hurt more than the actual muscle burn, right? So that's the neat part about these exercises. Once you start to play around with them, you'll start to see that some suit heavyweight, some suit lightweight, some suit more conservative ranges of motion, and then other ones you might be able to push the range of motion a bit more. So it's a great discovery process. It makes it so much fun. So yeah, keep discovering stuff about yourself. Keep discovering what you like and what you don't like and what your body likes, most importantly, you know. And then once you start discovering that, you can start to really kind of put it all together into the perfect workout program for yourself. But until you get that one, make sure you get one of mine, you know, or at least, or 10 of mine, 10 of my workout programs. And if you don't get 10 of my workout programs, I'm sending a Sasquatch to your house. I'll send a Sasquatch. Look it up. I live in Harrison Hot Springs, okay, BC, Canada, and we have lots of Sasquatches here. So you don't know how many friends I have that are Sasquatches. I could send them to your house. I wouldn't take the risk if I were you. I just buy a bunch of my workout programs just to offset the risk of a Sasquatch showing up. But that's me, you know. I'm a smart man. That's me. All right, let's do another set of incline presses.
Now, as you can see, the 70-pound dumbbells are baby weight for me, which is why I'm doing my best to make this exercise harder than it has to be. Because what I'm trying to do is just exaggerate the stretch and then hold at the bottom, but at the same time, I'm not relaxing. So you always have to remember that no matter what weight you're working with, it's not, or at least for the most part, not a good idea to relax the muscles at the bottom of the movement. So I'm still keeping the tension on the pecs, still keeping that constant tension. I'm just pausing while I hold that tension and then squeezing up. But yeah, it's a great feeling, and it's a great way to rehabilitate the joints and to get that groove perfected.
Now, a question I often get from people on YouTube and Instagram and stuff is, hey Jason, if you know that certain exercise you did, super light, you felt the tension in the muscles you wanted to hit and it felt so great, then why don't you do that all the time? Why don't you just do that all the time? And that's a good question, and it's actually something that I've deeply investigated. Because what happened was, just like you guys, I would find something that really works really well and it would feel great, and then I'd notice that that technique would start to diminish over time. So as great as it was in the beginning, then in successive workouts, maybe 6, 7, 8 workouts later, it started to no longer give me any gains or any fruit. I'd start to feel like, okay, something's missing. It's almost like the body wanted wants a different challenge, right? And so then I would go back into my old way, such as heavy weight or faster reps or whatever it was I was doing. And then once I did that, and then went back into the perfect technique, slower or deeper range of motion or whatever, then that technique would be rejuvenated again for me, and it would start to give me some gains. So the truth is that some things only work when there is a synergy happening. And I started to notice that synergy was more important than any one individual technique. Now this is genius. Remember that. The synergy is more important than any one technique or variable. And people get so lost, especially in this, I guess you could say it's almost like a hyper-focused point of view right now we have on the internet. People get hyper-focused into one detail, and they'll argue one detail to death, but not look at a greater picture of what's going on, right? And the big picture matters. The big picture matters much more than the small detail. That's the truth. You know, like you could be doing the perfect squat form and the perfect this and the perfect that, but if your diet is bad and your sleep is bad, guess what? You know, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to get the results. So it's a combination of the variables that make this Harry Potter-like spell that makes muscle mass. You see? It's like you've got this bubbling cauldron of all these different details. And if you don't put all the ingredients in, you don't get the same result. So yeah, there's a time and place for perfect range of motion or perfect form, just to perfectly isolate a certain muscle group. And then there's times for, you know, the swinging and the hyper intense, heavier weight stuff, or maybe partial range of motion, or maybe not necessarily quite as aggressive with the range of motion, but you're more aggressive with the weight. You see, it's almost like a sliding scale, right? The more weight you use, then you got to be a little bit more conservative or careful with the range of motion. But when you're using lighter weight, then it's not quite as, there's a bit more room for error, let's put it that way. And the body doesn't just tear the muscle off the bone if something happens or some mistake happens, you see? So this is why you have to adjust these variables. And this is why I'm teaching you how to be a Jedi in this stuff instead of just saying, hey, just do this, and do this, you know? I mean, I know I do that in my workout program, tell you, you know, what to do, but at the same time, anything I tell you never supersedes your own awareness and your own ability to connect to your own body and pay attention to what it's saying. And I've had a lot of people say that, Jason, that's an advanced concept, you know, only advanced people are going to get it. I don't know if that's necessarily the truth, okay? Because a lot of people out there know not to put their hand on a hot stove. Why? Not because somebody told them, but because they experienced what it's like to burn themselves. Kind of like I did on the barbecue yesterday. See, I burned myself on the barbecue. So you just know, right? You just know from pain. And if something's given you a certain type of pain, you know, you're feeling this weird pain, not a muscular pain, but like a grinding or almost like a sharp pain or a tweak or a massive inflammation after the workout, yeah, there's a good chance that you're doing something improperly. So yeah, pay attention first, and yeah, listen to me second. That's all I got to say. Unless, of course, I'm telling you to pay attention. Then listen to me first. All right, let's do some biceps. I'm going to do some bicep curls right here. On this, I'm going to stand up like this and do some bicep curls. So I'm actually going to put this in a more vertical position, though. But yeah, I like the hybrid incline curl lately. That's kind of my thing. I don't know why. Now, sometimes people mix up exercise form and swinging with bodily structure. Like they don't really know. Like So for instance, because I have a torn labrum on my left shoulder as well as my right, because dislocation shoulder here from hockey and stuff, my shoulders will sit forward like this because the labrum is not really intact. So it causes me to have a different position of a starting point when I'm doing a bicep curl. Now, I don't really mind starting back like this and stuff. It does help take the stress off the bicep tendon and stuff, but I find it is a more natural movement for me to access my biceps. So sometimes just because my shoulders move forward and back a little bit, that's just because they slide in the joint. It's not because I'm having trouble keeping form from a technical standpoint. It's just based on a structure that's going on. And you may have something like that going on in your body too, right? And so you will find that you'll have to make adjustments sometimes depending on that, but it doesn't mean that you can't access muscle growth, right? Like I'm getting some great development in the biceps from doing this. And that's why I'm kind of liking the hybrid incline, because I like to lean back a little bit at certain parts of the lift and then come forward and then lean back to get that stretch and that extra contraction at the top. But you'll have to feel yourself through that and see what is appropriate for you. Now, another problem with the fitness industry that I've found since being on YouTube and making content like this is that I found that there's a bit of an imbalance going on. And what I mean by this is that, it's fine to be in a healthy way, unsatisfied with where you are at in your training or what your body looks like and so forth. If that helps motivate you to do the hard stuff, such as, weight train and eat properly and take care of yourself, right? But where it becomes a problem is that when you start to crucify yourself for stuff you can't control, right? When you start to beat the body up for things that are just beyond your control, such as, say you've had a bad injury happen to you, or perhaps you have genetically certain shaped muscles in a certain way, and no matter what you do, you cannot shape them like, Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Or whatever. The bottom line is that now just beating yourself up for the sake of being chronically dissatisfied is just creating misery. And so I want you to really focus on what it is about your physique, or what it is about your training or your journey in the gym here, what it is that you really enjoy and that you find is your strength. And I've talked about this before, but the truth is that when I was training in a garage, when I was 14 years old, 15 years old, sure, I had the muscle magazines to aspire to. I would see all these great bodybuilders in there and how great they looked. And I would, want to look like them, right? But the biggest thing that I really found was that because I was by myself, I could see my own improvements in the mirror, even if they were minor, even if everybody else in the world thought they were no big deal. I could feel them and see them and gain motivation and inspiration from it. So you start to inspire yourself based on your own small improvements. And it's really important for you to learn how to enjoy your own progress. Right? When you enjoy your own progress and you're not comparing to everybody else, your pathway is much happier, and you will definitely still achieve as great things as you can achieve, right? It's not going to be a path of misery along the way. Because you see a lot of people, they'll constantly compare themselves, and then what will happen is they'll use that for motivation, but even when they achieve the highest pinnacle of success, they're still chronically dissatisfied and unhappy. So at that point, what is the point? Now, the reason why I'm saying this to you too, it's not just about happiness, it's also about something that's going to help you be able to train. Because I know people who are miserable, they will take great risks to overcome their misery. So if you are so unhappy with where your physique is at or whatever, sometimes you will do things that are not in alignment with what your body is telling you because you're willing to take that risk. You're willing to try anything to get the results in order for you to be possibly satisfied with yourself, right? So that could look like you lifting too heavy or doing too extreme a range of motion because you're thinking, screw it, I'm going to ignore the body and I'm just going to take some sort of weird risk in order to achieve the muscle growth. And maybe it's because I'm not taking big enough risks with my body and that's why I'm not getting it. That stuff is not going to work positively for you in the long run. If anything, it will work against you. And yeah, usually it will lead to the detriment of your entire natural bodybuilding journey. So yeah, before you do anything extreme, seek satisfaction and happiness as you train, as you meet the weights. But again, it's always about a path of discernment and doing what is in alignment with truth in your own body, not necessarily what's in alignment with your suffering, or your insecurity. So, I think most of us older guys have learned this lesson the hard way, but in case, you haven't learned this lesson yet, and maybe it'll help you just find a little bit more happiness along this path and get more results in the long run. That's the whole point, right? You'll get a lot more results if you learn to enjoy this instead of make it a path of misery for yourself. So that's what I got to say about that. So I'm going to do some external rotator cuff stuff. And this is my next thing here. External rotator cuff stuff really helps the delt size, honestly. A lot of times, a lot of guys won't do it because they're fixated on doing front delt work and side delt work. And that's all good, But it's amazing how much just the rotation around the joint contributes to that softball look in the shoulders. So it's not only good for rehabilitation and keeping the shoulders healthy, but it's also really good for building delt size, right? And making that aesthetic sort of look. So that's why I'm doing these. I'm actually starting to do these a little bit more often lately, and I'm really enjoying them. So the truth is, though, about this movement is that it's not necessary for you to do a lot of heavy weight. You don't have to be doing 20 pounders, 30 pounders, 40 pounders. You can be doing 5, 10 pounders, 6 pounders, like whatever. Like you can do lightweight on this and get a nice burn and a good pump, and that will actually help you rehabilitate that area and make the shoulder more stable. And of course, really important for me because of the instability caused from some of the injuries from sports and stuff. So I find this really helps my shoulders look better and at the same time helps stabilize the shoulders during pressing movements.
So as you can see, I do quite a few reps on this. So, there's not really a steadfast rule on what rep range you have to do, but I'm really upwards of 40 or 50 reps and, even higher, honestly. It doesn't really have a limitation because these are isometric type muscles. The rotator cuff is mostly, at least the majority of its job is an isometric endurance type contraction. Now, that doesn't mean static holds are automatically better for it. I mean, stationary movements. I do find that movement is good because through the entire range of motion in a bench press and stuff, there is going to be micro external rotations and internal rotations that happen, right? So really what I'm saying is high reps work. If you do too much weight, then you start to recruit other muscle groups and momentum in order to get the motion to do what you want it to do. You start swinging it around. But the whole point is just isolation of that external rotator cuff muscle. And remember, the external rotator cuff muscles are important because your chest and your lats are internal rotators. So with a lot of people, or really most people, the external rotators are a weak link. They're the things that don't necessarily get worked enough in order to catch up with overall balance of the physique. So yeah, this is the way I do it. I prefer it on the incline like this, but you can do it on the flat if you want. And of course, there are other varieties of external rotation that you can experiment with as well.
So yeah, my final point for this video is to talk to you a little bit about the value of some of these smaller movements, like this rotator cuff exercise I just did, or using lighter weights for isolation, such as flies, and doing some of these different finisher type movements. Sometimes by doing so much compound work and heavy strength type work, you might be missing some really great benefits from doing some of these smaller sort of things. such as the external rotator cuff exercises and so forth. So, you know, it's really great when you can approach this path holistically. So the heavy weights have their place, the light weights have their place, the compound movements have their place, the isolation movements have their place, and even machines also have their place. As much as I don't really have much machines in my home gym, but that's more of a space problem rather than a preference problem, right? So, you know, it's a matter of just mixing everything up, realizing that there is a overall synergy that you're trying to access. And sometimes a combination of all of these different elements will suit you best rather than becoming a Puritan in one direction or another. Although you will find that you'll probably have leanings, like maybe your body responds more so to one type of training than another. But that doesn't mean it has to be exclusive, right? So yeah, so if anything, that's what I want you to take from this training day. Hopefully this helps you out in your training. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. And if you need to get hold of me, just go to naturalgallantbodybuilding.com. And thanks to the Patreon supporters, and take care for now. Mountain.